New Sacramento Kings general manager Scott Perry made his identity for this team going forward perfectly clear. But how many players on the current roster actually fit that identity? We'll discuss right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time. Time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. And today's episode is brought to you by the new Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox, no console needed. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. And if you missed Scott Perry's introductory press conference earlier this week, he said a lot of fantastic things. And one of the things that I talked about here on Locked On Kings before his press conference is the importance for Scott Perry to establish a direction and an identity for this Sacramento Kings team this summer. By the time we get to training camp in the fall, we should know exactly who the Sacramento Kings are trying to be, how they are trying to play, what this team is all about, because that's something that has been in flux for far too long, really for the vast majority of this past season. The Kings lacked an identity. Really, they haven't had an identity since their high-powered offense back in 2023 when they actually made the playoffs. So establishing that identity was very important. And Scott Perry, to his credit, laid out his identity to a T in his introductory press conference, which I really appreciate. Here, if you missed it, here is Scott Perry and the identity that he wants to establish here in Sacramento amongst his Kings roster.
I'm just learning this roster. Again, I've watched them from afar. There's some talent here. There's an obvious need. I think everybody in this room probably would agree to it, that there's not a true point guard on the roster. Also, as I assess it from afar, I think we need to add more length and athleticism to this group to enhance some of the talent that's here. So that's, from that standpoint, that's kind of what I'm looking at doing right now. And the second part of your question was the identity. Any successful pro sports organization, or any company for that matter, has to have an identity. And that's one thing that I don't see here yet, but that's what I'm all about, is establishing an identity. What does it mean to be a Sacramento Kings player? To play here, we're going to require toughness. We want a defensive orientation. We got to play extremely hard, and we got to play together on the offensive end. Share the game is what I like to say. We got to be professional. We got to be disciplined, and we got to have accountability. And so if you fit that profile, you'll see guys wearing that Kings jersey. If not, then we'll figure out how to get guys in here that do. And a line that you may hear me say, and you may have heard this before, I am looking for volunteers to that, not hostages.
So to run through it, 7 identity traits or qualities that Scott Perry pointed out there. Toughness, defensive oriented, playing hard, play together on offense, being a professional, being disciplined, and being accountable. Those are the 7 main traits that Scott Perry just laid out for the identity that he wants to form here in Sacramento. Now, some of them are very specific. Some of them are a little more broad. There are some identity traits in here that all 30 NBA teams want. Accountability, for example, being professional, for example. But there are other ones that more specifically speak to how the Kings want to play basketball, the defensive orientation, playing hard, toughness, playing together. So an offense that I take, playing together offense is one that shares the basketball, moves the basketball. Those are very on-court specific identity traits that Scott Perry wants to establish here in Sacramento. And of course, in order to do that, you have to fill a roster with players that fit those traits and emphasize those desired strengths. So I've put together a scoring system. I've taken those 7 identity traits that Scott Perry laid out there, and I am applying those 7 traits to every single main player on the Kings roster currently, even players like Trey Lyles, for example, who are expiring contracts, right? I don't know if Scott Perry is going to bring them back or not, but for this exercise, I'm not including some of the super end of bench guys, like the two-way guys, like Isaac Jones is not on this list, for example. But I'm breaking these 7 traits down, and if you fit that trait, then you get a point, essentially. If you kind of fit or a question mark, I'll give you half a point for that. If you don't fit, obviously you don't get a point. The goal is here to get above 5 or 5 and above. To me, if you're 5 and above, you're a good fit for this Scott Perry identity. If you're less than 5, you're just not, you're okay to not great or bad fit in this identity. And I think the Kings need to limit those as much as possible. I think it's okay to have 1 or 2 guys, as long as they're not super high profile guys, that don't necessarily fit into that identity on paper, but provide a boost elsewhere. But you can't have a lot of those guys, or you don't have an identity, or you're just trying to force an identity on a team or on players that don't meet that identity. If you fall in the 6 to 7 range, like you're a great fit, you're perfect, you belong here, Scott Perry should have no problem with you. So let's start running through this roster. Let's start with Domantas Sabonis, okay? Toughness, ding, 100%. Domantas Sabonis is as tough as they come. So Sabonis, no even need to debate or discuss. Sabonis, toughness, yes. Defensive oriented. And by the way, I'm going to be pretty brutal or harsh or cutthroat on these, because that's what the Kings need to do when looking at this roster, and Scott Perry needs to do. Domas, not defensive oriented. I think he's a better defensive player than people give him credit for because of his defensive rebounding. And rebounding, of course, is incredibly important. You have to finish off the defensive possession. But Domantas Sabonis is not an anchor on the defensive end. He's not a rim protector. He's not someone that you can heavily lean on. So he does not fit the defensive-oriented category for me. Again, you don't have to have a perfect 7 out of 7 in order to be a part of Scott Perry's roster. I don't think it's realistic to expect every player on this roster to hit all 7 points perfectly. Doesn't mean they're not going to strive to, but we're looking at the type of player that we know these guys to be, especially the veterans on this roster, because this is not a young Kings roster anymore. This roster is older, very veteran established. So far, Domas is 1 for 2. Playing hard, 100%. Ding. Yeah, he absolutely plays hard. Playing together on offense, 1,000,000%. Right? Domantas Sabonis' first impulse is to get his teammates involved, pass the ball, run everything through him, share. So he absolutely fits that category. Being a professional, yes, Domantas Sabonis is absolutely a professional. Disciplined. Yes, Sabonis, I would say, is a disciplined player. That doesn't mean he's not sloppy at times. Sometimes he turns the basketball over too much when he's trying to force some things. And sometimes he's a little too disciplined and you want him to shoot the ball a little bit more, especially when he's open. But yes, I would say more often than not, Sabonis fits the disciplined category. Accountable, I put a bit of a question mark. And this is where I'm getting a little bit harsh, because you know me and you know how much I've defended Domantas Sabonis over the years. Accountability can be taken a lot of different ways. Accountability is owning up to, or not just saying the right things, but recognizing, hey, the way that I played in that play-in game against the Dallas Mavericks was absolutely inexcusable. The way that I played against the Golden State Warriors in the playoffs was not horrible, not nearly as bad as people make it out to be, but my team needed more from me there, and I didn't step up to the plate. That kind of accountability. Does Sabonis take that accountability, not just with his words, but with his actions, to where when he gets in those opportunities again, you see that improvement, right? Because we saw him improve as a shooter all season long. But when it came down to a postseason game where you can use that shooting to space the floor a little bit more, we saw none of it from Domas. So I'm going to put a question mark next to accountability, which means, again, he gets half a score. So that is a score of 5.5 out of 7. That is in the solid fit category. So I would say Domantas Sabonis is a solid fit for Scott Perry's identity. Let's move on to DeMar DeRozan. Toughness. I would say no. I would say he doesn't fit that. That does not mean that DeMar DeRozan is not a tough player, but I would not look at DeMar DeRozan as a physically impactful player. I do not look at DeMar DeRozan as someone who would play in the Houston Rockets system, would play in a way where he's going to put a body on somebody. He's going to be physical. He's a very skilled player to where he will take advantage of opposing teams' toughness when they're reaching in with his pump fakes to get to the foul line. I'm not saying that's not valuable, but for this identity trait, being a tough player, bringing toughness to the Kings roster, I don't think DeMar DeRozan fits that category. Defensive oriented, forget about it. DeMar DeRozan is not defensive oriented. Playing hard, I'll give that a question mark. I'll give him half a point for that. And again, that sounds like I'm calling him lazy. That's not what I'm doing. I attribute playing hard to a lot of hustle and making those hustle plays, those like the way Devin Carter plays, the way Keon Ellis plays. I don't think DeMar DeRozan plays that same way, or you can't count on him to play that same way consistently. And honestly, he's 36, 37 years old. That's not a surprise. So I'm not putting him in the playing hard category. Playing together on offense, no. Now, he did a better job, especially after the De'Aaron Fox trade, of facilitating and assisting and moving the basketball, kind of because he had to, because the Kings didn't have a point guard. But none of us are looking at that situation and going, yeah, that's a sustainable way for the Sacramento Kings team to play. Scott Perry even brought it up, like this team needs a point guard. Doug Christie has been talking about this team needs a point guard. It's very, very clear the Kings need and will find a point guard this offseason. So expecting DeMar DeRozan to continue to be a playmaking player when there's an actual established point guard, no. DeMar is very ISO heavy. Put the ball in my hands, clear out, get out of the way, and let me go to work. That does not fit the playing together on offense. A pro, 100%. He fits that absolutely. Disciplined, I'll put a question mark with disciplined, because more often than not, I think he takes the right shot, but there are times where we saw the Kings should be moving the basketball more, and DeMar DeRozan would kind of just dribble the air out of the ball or look to get his shots too early in the shot clock or whatever. So I'll put a question mark next to that. Accountable, yes. I do think DeMar DeRozan is absolutely accountable. That is a score of 3. 3 out of 7. DeMar DeRozan is not a good fit for Scott Perry's Sacramento Kings. I think we've known this. I think we saw that all season. Again, it's not a slide on DeMar. This is not a crap on DeMar DeRozan show. We know how good DeMar DeRozan is in the right area on the right team as a kind of mercenary scorer on an established playoff team. DeMar DeRozan would be fantastic. That's what I think he's looking for anyway at his age at the end of his career. Been laying it all out there. It's in the best interest of DeMar DeRozan and the Sacramento Kings to move on. I think this further illustrates it. We still got to talk about Zach Lavine, Malik Monk, Keegan Murray, Keon Ellis, Jonas Valanciunas, Devin Carter, Jake LaRavia, Trey Lyles, and Doug McDermott. That's all still coming here on Locked On Kings. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. Basketball and hockey playoffs are here, and there's no better time to turn your sports knowledge into real cash than with Prize Picks, the top destination for daily fantasy action. Prize Picks makes it simple. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and you're in. You could even mix and match players across basketball, hockey, baseball, and more for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Yes, that's a real number. Whether you're picking like Nikola Jokic more than 25 points, Jaylen Brown more than 4 assists, turn your playoff hot takes into tickets to basketball championship series. Every lineup you make on Prize Picks will enter you into the Takes 2 Tickets sweepstakes, which could get you a +1, get you and a +1, a VIP trip to the championship. championship. That's not a joke. Plus, if you're paying attention to hockey right now, want to pair that with your NBA basketball action. Connor McDavid taking more than 1 goal, and Austin Matthews for more than 5 shots on goal. The app makes it so easy. You can build a lineup in under 60 seconds. Plus, there's incredible promotions like Taco Tuesday and Flex Friday promos that'll help you make it even easier and more fun to make your money. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Zach Lavine's an interesting one, right? Because of a number of factors. The first is the financial factor. Zach Lavine is paid a lot of money. He's going to be a very difficult contract for the Sacramento Kings to move on from. So hopefully he fits, because it's very likely he's going to be on your roster. And if Zach Lavine's on your roster, he has to be a feature of your roster, right? There's no way you have Zach Lavine and his scoring ability on your roster if you don't plan on featuring him. So if you're featuring someone who is not a good fit in your identity, that could lead to some problems. That's one of the reasons. The other reason is, as many of you know, Scott Perry spoke earlier this year, or sometime earlier, on whether or not Zach Lavine was a winning basketball player. This is when Perry was doing his podcast and doing hits for ESPN, and he spoke about Zach and how great of a scorer and incredible player that Zach is, but he questioned whether or not Zach's impact actually leads to winning basketball games. He addressed that also in his press conference. I don't expect it to be a part of animosity between the two necessarily. I think they can absolutely work through it, but I think it also speaks to what type of player Scott Perry is looking for and what types of players he doesn't necessarily find as much value in. So how does Zach Lavine fit into Scott Perry's identity traits? Toughness. I'll put a question mark. I think Lavine has been tough throughout his career, battling through injuries. I think when Lavine wants to, he can play with a certain level of toughness and physicality on the offensive end to get to the rim, get downhill, get above the rim with his flashy dunk style, though we don't see that as much anymore. But he's still very crafty with his layups, finishing around the basket. When he is in attack mode, that is an element of toughness on the offensive end. So I'll put a question mark for Lavine there. Defensive oriented, forget about it. Zach Lavine doesn't play defense, or he plays very limited defense. Again, you can get away with 1 or 2 guys like that on your roster, but if you want to be a defensive-oriented roster, you can't have multiple Zach Lavines running around. Zach Lavine does not fit the defensive orientation. Playing hard, I'll put a question mark on that too. The only reason why I put a question mark on that, more often than not, I do think Zach Lavine plays hard. But there was that random stretch, and granted, there could have been some things happening off the floor. It was a weird year, being traded midway through, excuses, whatever. There was that random stretch for a week or 2 weeks where Zach Lavine just was not shooting the basketball. He just wasn't shooting. So that alone gives me pause just to give him a check mark for playing hard outright. Playing together on offense, though, I do give him a check mark for that. Even though he's not necessarily a playmaker, he is a facilitator. And the way that he plays on the offensive end, he's so offensively gifted that it does open up opportunities for his teammates. To play together on offense and to move the basketball, you don't have to be an assist-first center like Domantas Sabonis or a pure point guard like Steve Nash or CP3. You don't. I think the way that Zach Lavine plays offense does open up opportunities for his teammates. So I do give him a check for playing together on offense. A professional, yes. Zach Lavine's a pro. Disciplined, I'll put a question mark. Need to see a little bit more. I think for the most part he is and can be, but there are, I'm sure, going to be some times where Zach Lavine says, give me the basketball, get out of the way, and starts chucking a little bit. Now, to be fair, last season, he had one of the best shooting seasons, if not the best shooting season of his career. One of the best three-point shooters in the league, period. So maybe if he can continue that into next season, maybe him chucking is not necessarily a bad thing. But I'll give him a question mark for that. And then accountable, I'll give him a question mark for that too, just because there are elements of his game that people talk about as, one, Scott Perry saying not being a winning basketball player. He has a reputation around the league of being a guy that can put up numbers and fill up the stat sheet against bad teams or in meaningless games, but when it comes to really meaningful games, he struggles or doesn't step up. We saw kind of a little bit of that, but not really, but kind of a little bit of that in the play-in game against the Dallas Mavericks. So I'll put a question mark on that as well. That gives him a total score of 4 out of 7. That to me makes him a not good fit. Again, he is someone that is paid a lot of money and is likely not going anywhere. And you can have guys on your roster that aren't perfect fits. But if he is the guy on the roster, and I have a hard time imagining unless the Kings go out and get another player. Like if Zach Lavine and Domantas Sabonis are still on this roster to start next season, it's Zach Lavine's team more than it's Domantas Sabonis' team, in my opinion, because of the way Zach Lavine plays. He's a more high-profile player than Sabonis is. Sabonis might get better numbers overall, but Zach Lavine is an actual offensive player that looks to score in a scoring league in the modern NBA. Can you have your guy be someone who does not fit the team identity or doesn't fit it nearly as much as you want them to? It's going to be something for Scott Perry to figure out. All right, Malik Monk. Toughness, 100%. Malik Monk plays through being banged up all the time. He's a very physical player despite his size. He likes to attack the rim, get above the rim. He's not afraid to chew guys out. He's not afraid to go mano a mano. Like, Malik Monk is a tough basketball player. Not questioning that at all. Defensive oriented, I am questioning that. Yeah, Malik Monk is not a defensive oriented player. He's not a great defender. He's not, probably doesn't even fit into the good defender category. I think he can get the job done. He's not so bad on defense that it negates what he does on the offensive end. Quite the opposite. I don't think his defense is bad enough to hold him back, but he's not a defensive first player. I don't think he fits into a defensive oriented identity. Playing hard, 100%. Do I really need to defend that? Malik Monk plays hard. Playing together on offense. Malik loves to share the basketball. The Kings need to find a way to get him back to that six-man facilitator role that he was when De'Aaron Fox was here. Can they bring in another point guard that Malik can either play next to or fill in for as a facilitator coming in off the bench if the Kings do decide that is his role going forward? I do think he fits that. I think he's absolutely a pro. Disciplined, I'll put a question mark on because kind of who Malik is as a player, he's a little chaotic at times. I call it the best chaos. Like it's who he is, and you kind of have to live with it. Like you unleash Malik Monk. He's going to do some silly things at times. He's also going to pull off some incredibly awesome plays and moments that'll fire up your team and fire up a Golden One Center crowd that you feed off of and build off of. So that's a question mark, but not necessarily in a negative way for me with Malik Monk. Accountable, though? Yes, he's accountable. He's one of the few guys that you'll actually hear saying, like, we got to be better. I got to be better. Now, at some point, you can't just keep saying that. You actually have to go out and be better. But I believe Malik. Like, Malik takes responsibility for his mistakes all the time, publicly, especially. Of course, he does it privately as well. So that gives Malik Monk a score of 5.5 out of 7. Same as Domantas Sabonis. That's a good fit. Good fit in Scott Perry's identity. So I feel pretty confident with that. How about Keegan Murray? Actually, I'm going to do this. Let's do Keegan Murray and Keon Ellis together because both of these I think should make everybody happy. Keegan and Keon, tough? Yes. Keegan and Keon, defensive oriented? Yes, they're your two best defenders. Keegan and Keon, playing hard? 100%. Keegan and Keon, playing together on offense? 100%. They're guys that have been perimeter poachers, catch and shoot guys. Keegan, we'd like to see him be a little more aggressive on the offensive end, but he certainly plays together. He's willing to fill in his role and responsibility on the offensive end. Same with Keon Ellis, which is with his catch and shoot three-point shooting. Pros, 100%, both of them are. Disciplined, absolutely. They don't just chuck. They take smart shots, make the right plays on the defensive end. If anything, Keon gets a little bit gambly sometimes on the defensive end, but more often than not, it pays off. Accountable, 100%, both of them are. So that's perfect 7s out of 7 for Keegan and Keon. Perfect fits in this identity. That's why players like Keegan and Keon are so valuable around the NBA, because those guys can fit with almost every identity because of the way that they play. You need more players like Keegan and Keon. Now, you need stars as well. They need to complement stars. But Keegan and Keon are so essential to the future of the Sacramento Kings and fit perfectly in Scott Perry's identity. And you know what? I got another 7 for you. Jonas Valanciunas. Not to the level of Keegan and Keon, but toughness, come on. Dude's a brick wall. Defensive oriented, he could be a better shot blocker, but he defends the paint. He makes defenses at least think about it. Guards don't want to attack the rim when Jonas Valanciunas is there. So I suppose I could give him a question mark there, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because defensively he does help this Kings team. Playing hard, yes, Jonas Valanciunas plays hard. Playing together on offense, yes, he fills his role on the offensive end, especially when it comes to setting screens. He's a professional, he's disciplined, and he's accountable. So I'll give another 7 to Jonas Valanciunas. What about Devin Carter, Jake LaRavia, Trey Lyles, and Doug McDermott? I'll have those for you before we wrap up here on Locked On Kings. Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV stick. Did you know that your Fire TV is also an Xbox? You can turn your TV into your gaming and entertainment hub at any time without any of your consoles being required. That's a big deal. It saves you a ton of money. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're good to go. Dive into hundreds of premium titles, including EA Sports College Football 25, Call of Duty, so many to choose from, and you can easily stream your games just like you stream your favorite shows. You can jump into your favorite Xbox titles without needing your console in every single room, so you can use it throughout your house. Or if you're traveling and on the go and need to take your games or your kids' games with you to your hotel or grandma's house or wherever you're going, just grab that Fire TV stick and it hooks you up. If you already have a console too, it works perfectly fine with that in the same house. There are so many different services for you to take advantage of, millions upon millions of titles to stream through Netflix and Prime Video and Disney Plus, Hulu, and more. It's all on the Amazon Fire TV stick. So head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatibility controller are required for the gaming. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. All right, let's bring this home. Let's talk about the rookie. Now going into his second year, Devin Carter. I'm actually really looking forward to, assuming Scott Perry keeps him around, which I don't know why he wouldn't. I think I'm looking forward to seeing what Devin Carter looks like in his second season, what he looks like with a full training camp. I'm going to be paying close attention to Devin Carter when we get to the fall. How does he fit into Scott Perry's identity, though? Well, toughness. Yes, Devin Carter is a tough basketball player, not just playing through the injuries that he plays with, but the way that he plays. He's very scrappy. He's very aggressive. Yes, he is defensive-oriented first and foremost. Those intangibles, those things are what you drafted Devin Carter for, what Monte McNair drafted Devin Carter for. Those are the things you don't have to teach. He just goes out and does it. You unleash him almost. He plays hard 100%. I will put a question mark with play together on offense because there's questions about how he can be as a floor general, as a leader. I think people have the general feeling that he's not a true point guard. So do you play him next to a true point guard off the ball as a 2? Can you play him next to Malik Monk? Like, what does that look like long term? So there's a question mark there. Being a professional, I think he is. I think Devin Carter has been a professional his entire time. No reason to believe that he's not. Disciplined, I'll put a question mark on that. The jump shot needs some work. Sometimes he attacks the basket, gets a little bit out of control. And that's something that it's hard to be a disciplined player as a super young player in the league. Discipline is also something you kind of develop and learn over time as you get more comfortable. And you hear that saying that the game starts to slow down. That's essentially just players being less overwhelmed and more up to what the game is like at the NBA level. De'Aaron Fox is a good example of this too. Like De'Aaron Fox was all gas, no brakes his first couple of years in the league, right? That incredible speed that he had was amazing. But over time, he learned when to use that speed in bursts and not just go full throttle and get into trouble and turn the ball over or force up a bad shot. Accountable, I'll give him a check mark for that because I do feel that Devin Carter learned, especially from being sent down back into the G League to get himself going a little bit, came back from the G League, played really well for the remainder of that season under Doug Christie. That gives Carter a score of 6 out of 7. That's a good fit. How about Jake LaRavia? This is an interesting one because Jake is a free agent. And there's only so much the Sacramento Kings can offer Jake LaRavia because the Memphis Grizzlies, Jake's former team, did not pick up his team option for the final year of his contract. Well, because they didn't do that and then they traded him away, the Kings then take on that decision, which sucks because that kind of caps you out on how much you can offer him. So if he gets more money elsewhere, he's going to go. I think the cap is at around $5.5 million a year. So maybe the Kings can hold on to him. Let's see if he's as good of a fit as we think he is. Toughness? Yeah, Jake LaRavia is a tough basketball player. The way that he plays, he plays tough. Defensive oriented. I'm not saying his defense is perfect or anything like that, but defensively, he did make a solid impact for the Sacramento Kings at the wing position, which was needed. Playing hard, yes. I think Jake LaRavia won a lot of people over pretty quickly with how hard and scrappy he plays. I'll put playing together on offense, I'll put a question mark by that because I think offensively he can fit and he can work, but how does he look consistently in a Kings half-court offensive set? That's what I'm curious about. So I'll put a question mark there. Being a professional, yes. By the way, it's really hard. Like almost, you're going to realize like nobody on this list fails being a pro. Like these guys are all pros. Being disciplined, I think so. I'll give him a check mark for that. There's nothing that LaRavia did that I thought was undisciplined. Being accountable, from everything that I've heard about him and what coaches say about him, he is an accountable player. That gives him a score of 6.5, 6.5 out of 7. That is a great fit here in Sacramento and Scott Perry's identity. So let's all hope that Perry is able to extend Jake LaRavia. Trey Lyles. This one's interesting because Trey Lyles is a free agent. And in my opinion, I think Trey Lyles is gone. I think it's time for him to move on. The Kings will probably want to move on. On paper, Trey Lyles makes a lot of sense. But it hasn't just really worked since that playoff year 2 years ago. He's also dealt with some nagging injuries. And once again, on paper, he does make sense because he fits the toughness category. I'll say he doesn't fit the defensive orientation category. He plays hard on the defensive end, but he's not a defensively impactful player. Plays hard for sure. Playing together on offense, he's a good fit for the Sacramento Kings offensively in theory of what they're trying to do with his ability to space the floor. A pro, disciplined, accountable, I'll put a question mark, and a reason for that is Trey made a comment, I think in his exit interviews and has made comments before, and he could be right, and I understand this, like it's hard to play consistently when you don't have a consistent role. I also think like Trey Lyles didn't always play himself into a consistent role, and he dealt with the injuries as well that had an impact on that. So I'll give him a little bit of a question mark if I'm being nitpicky towards his accountability, but that's still a score of 5.5 out of 7. It's a solid fit. Solid fit. So Trey Lyles, I still think makes sense for the Sacramento Kings. Finally, I'll just do him because he's a fan favorite. Doug McDermott. Toughness? No. Like, no. Look, Doug McDermott is not going to be a guy that you expect to like roll the sleeves up and get physical and play scrappy in a game like that. That's not. He is a sniper. He's a specialist. Defensive oriented? No. If he was, he'd play more. No. Playing hard? Yes. He plays hard to get to his spots. We know he can catch fire. Offensively, playing together on offense? Yes. He's not necessarily someone who's going to move the basketball a lot, but offensively, he has his role. He sticks to it, and it was fun for the Kings at many times. Yes, he's a pro. Yes, he's disciplined. He puts up shots, but he doesn't put up bad shots. And yes, I think he's accountable too. He seemed to fill his role and accept his role and responsibilities even when I don't think he was getting the fair playing time that he deserved. There are times where the Kings didn't use him until like the end of games or garbage time that I felt he could have gotten in before that, but it didn't seem to bother him much. That gives him a score of 5 out of 7, which is right at that cutoff for being a solid fit. So that's the grading system that I put together. And a lot of these players, again, like to run through it, like Domas, good fit. Malik Monk, good fit. Keegan, Keon, Jonas, perfect fits. Devin Carter, really good fit. Jake LaRavia, really good fit. Trey Lyles, good fit. Doug McDermott, I'll say good to fine fit. But DeMar DeRozan, bad fit. Zach Lavine, bad fit. Be interesting to see what the Kings do with those two guys. Again, that does not negatively reflect them as players. I'm not saying they're bad basketball players because they do not fit with this identity. But this is how the Sacramento Kings want to be known. This is how Scott Perry wants to build his team. And if you roll back, both DeMar DeRozan and Zach Lavine is not just two players that don't fit into that identity, but two high-profile players that are going to have the ball in their hands more often than not. The centerpieces of your team, two of them don't fit your identity, then you don't have that identity. We'll see what Perry does this offseason. I look forward to every single player he goes out and gets, whether it's in the draft in the second round, or if the Kings are lucky enough to keep their first round pick, or in free agency or trades or whatever. I'm going to keep this grading system, and we're going to enter those players, or what we believe those players to be, into this grading system and see if they pass that test for fitting the Sacramento Kings identity. Now I want to hear from you. Your thoughts on the grading system, your thoughts on the fits, your thoughts on Perry's identity. Hit me up. Let me know. At MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Appreciate your support. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of Locked On Kings. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.